I'm Grant Walker. Welcome to Last Call for Tuesday, the 28th of July. Thanks for your company. I'll be back with Heads Up Wednesday, 10 a.m. Two commercial real estate moves in Christchurch. The commercial real estate industry in Christchurch has seen a strong shake-up, according to industrial leasing specialist Greg Mann, who recently joined Bailey's from NAI Harcourts. Normally, 2 or 3 of the 75 or so agents in Christchurch change from one agency to another in any 1 year. He says over the past 6 months, more than a dozen have moved, including Mr. Mann. Coupled with this, 2 new brands have entered the market, Knight Frank and Savills. Mr. Mann said by and large, these are run and staffed by agents that were already operating in Christchurch. However, a number of other agencies have also been active in recruiting first-time commercial agents, with probably another dozen added to the already highly competitive industry. He says commercial property investors tend to be very astute. They know the impact good and poor decisions can have on the value of their properties, and this is why it often takes new agents 4 or 5 years to gain the required knowledge and expertise to earn a client's respect. Mr. Mann says there have been some big market changes since 2014. He says in Wigram, Sockburn and Hornby there have been a lot of leasing activity, but some big increases and decreases in availability of specific stock of certain sizes. Mr. Mann says in the past we've seen more leasing activity when there is a lot of stock available. This usually occurs when the economy starts to come under pressure, although the commercial property market seems to start to show the effects after a lag of approximately 6 months. He says right now the situation is unique in that industrial vacancy has increased due to increased supply and a lot of new properties being built, but we continue to enjoy a relatively strong underlying economy. It will be interesting to see if this translates into very strong leasing activity. He says rental rates are strong and yields have been dropping. The handbrake is firmly on the dairy industry. For years there has been plenty of dairy money to go around, but the tap has been turned off and the trickle-down effects may become quite serious. He says, I've been asking some of my clients who have thought about selling properties whether they think the market is at or near the top of the cycle. As it's impossible to know before it's too late, selling at a point you think is near the top is about as good as you can call it. Personally, he says, I think we're at the top of the cycle. The first industrial builds after the 2011 earthquakes were larger design build projects. Mr. Mann says we could see tenants buying land and then 18 months later they'd move into their own new premises. As time passed, we saw the size of the buildings get smaller. Over the past 18 months, there has been a huge number of smaller industrial units come to the market for sale and for lease. Although there has been huge investor demand, they've required the properties to be tenanted first. Mr. Mann says the next few months will determine if some projects are halted due to reduced spending and business confidence. A recent lease he confirmed of an older 1,650 square metre low-stud warehouse in Hornby for a 5-year term equated to $70 a square metre for the warehouse component, 150 square metres for the office and amenities, $10 a week for the car parks. Offices of 300 square metres at Wigram were leased for $250 a square metre. Mr. Mann believes yields have probably reached their lows and will rise if vacancy levels rise. Mr. Mann says one commentator mentioned recently that if we're not careful, we could talk ourselves into a problem by being too negative about some of the issues facing our economy. He says we do have to be realists and be prepared, and being able to make well-informed decisions is critical to our success. My advice, he says, is a degree of caution should be factored into future property decisions. To China, shares on Chinese stock exchanges fell again in early trading today as investors gained no lead on the immediate direction of the market. The main Shanghai Composite dropped 3.8% within the first hour, but has since recovered slightly. The Shenzhen market was down 5.2% before it too bounced back a little, while the Chinext for new stocks is off 5.1%. Signs of government purchases that were prevalent in recent weeks went missing in Monday's rout, when the Shanghai Composite fell 8.5% in the biggest one-day drop in 8 years. The plunge was surprising because it followed a government rescue package that had helped drive a 16% rally since July the 8th. But PetroChina, long considered a favourite holding of state-linked rescue funds, sank 9.6%, just short of the 10% limit. The government-run oil producer had been one of the biggest sources of support for the Shanghai Composite on big down days in late June and early July. After the close of trading, the securities regulator denied speculation that the government had exited the stock market. A spokesman for the China Securities Regulatory Commission denied the China Securities Finance Corporation, a state-backed agency that provides margin financing and liquidity, had withdrawn support for equities. Support buying appeared to vanish without warning, leaving analysts guessing whether authorities shifted their policy stance or just got overwhelmed by a flood of sell orders. The spokesperson said the Commission will continue efforts to stabilise market and investor sentiment and prevent systemic risk. To crowdfunding, the new kid on the equity crowdfunding block has released its first campaign, an eco-tourism startup near Rotorua. Liftoff, which has Shareholders Association founder Bruce Shepherd as a director and which received a licence from the Financial Markets Authority last month, has launched a campaign for Rainforest Experiences New Zealand. The company says it will operate multi-day guided walks and mountain bike tours in Whirinaki, a rainforest conservation park southeast of Rotorua, using a recently completed 39-kilometre Department of Conservation track. It also intends to develop accommodation and other tourism packages, such as cultural experiences with local iwi. The company aims to raise between $600,000 and $1.25 million for a 49% share. If the maximum is raised, the company will issue 612,500 ordinary shares at $1 each, with investors receiving one preference share for each ordinary share. The preference share pays a fixed dividend and has no voting rights. This values the company pre-money at $638,000. Rainforest Experiences founder Chris Burt first began running guided walks in Whirinaki in 1994, but wants to build his business up to emulate the popular Milford track. The company aims to hold the exclusive operating licence for guided tours of the park. The company expects to host 256 multi-day walkers in its first year of operation, increasing to 828 in its second year and to 1,360 in the third. It expects to reach profitability in 2018 once it gets to 485 walkers a year. Each multi-day walker will pay $1,480 as compared to Abel Tasman's $1,400 and the Milford Track's $2,440 to $2,605. The company points to New Zealand's booming tourism industry as a key factor to reaching profitability. In the year to March 31st, overseas visitors spent $8.2 billion here, up 21% on the previous 12 months. Chinese visitors spent 61% more than in the previous year, surpassing $1 billion for the first time. Rainforest Experiences expects to get leases for accommodations facilities in the park approved in October and finish construction next February, at which point it will start marketing internationally. It intends to fully launch in October next year. Mr. Shepherd has previously told NBR Radio that Liftoff was partly set up to move valuations to sensible areas and will take a practical approach based on what prudent wholesale investors might pay. Liftoff's other directors are former FMA Strategic Intelligence Head Adam Hunt, former New Zealand Trade Commissioner and Ngāti Apa Developments Director Andrew French, and former HSBC Bank New Zealand Treasurer Tim Fitzgerald. Mr. Hunt, who is Managing Director, says Liftoff was attracted to Rainforest Experiences because of its potential to increase economic and social development in rural New Zealand. Liftoff will concentrate on these types of campaigns in future. Mr. Hunt says, "We hope this opportunity will demonstrate how there's now a new way to fund protection and enhancement of the physical environment on which New Zealand depends so heavily. Putting money into equity crowdfunding ventures is risky. Rainforest Experiences Information Memorandum warns there may be timing delays and its lease may be declined, although it says this is unlikely as Mr. Burt has held a succession of leases for the site since 1989. If it's declined, the company says it will repay the balance of funds back to investors after meeting application costs."
NBR Radio. With Clooney Restaurant, an unparalleled private dining room choice. NBR Radio.
This is NBR Radio on Tuesday the 28th of July. I'm Andrew Patterson. 2 Degrees launching into the residential broadband market. Joining me now, Chief Executive Stuart Sheriff. Welcome, obviously a big day for the company.
Hi Andrew, yeah, this is a significant milestone, probably the most significant milestone since 2 Degrees launched. This allows us to be a total telecommunications supplier in New Zealand now.
Yeah, how long have you been waiting for this day to come, Stuart?
I got here about 2.5 years ago, Andrew, so that was probably 2.5 years, I guess.
Right. This, of course, comes on the back of your acquisition of Snap. Why now? Why are you in a position now to make this offering to the market?
The acquisition was almost exactly 4 months ago. We've taken our time, Andrew. We could have got our product out there a bit sooner, but we wanted it to be right. Simplicity is one of our key values. We've only got 5 mobile plans out there in consumer land, and now we've got 2 very simple broadband plans there as well, and simplicity is the name of the game as far as we're concerned.
What's the offering? What makes this offering attractive compared to what is already in the market? This is obviously a competitive space.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there, Andrew. One is that we always guarantee the fastest possible technology. So if we bring you on at VDSL at the moment, and we know that fiber's coming down 6 months, 12 months down the track, we'll keep track of that for you, and we'll give you a call when fiber does become available, and we'll upgrade you for no charge.
And is that important in your research? Is that are customers telling you that speed is something that they highly value?
I think we're seeing an inflection point in the rollout of the UFB. I mean, we hit the 100,000 mark just a couple of weeks ago, and we celebrated that in Christchurch. And so I think you'll see the take-up on UFB growing exponentially. There's definitely a huge demand for data, not only in the video space, but just in general everyday life.
What about the way people are adopting now, obviously with Netflix offerings and so forth in the marketplace? How much is this space changing?
I think if you go back a couple of years ago, you could pick Sky or Sky. Now you've got a plethora of options. You've got Neon, which we think is the best in the market at the moment. You've got Lightbox across at Spark. You've got Netflix in the market. There's just a huge choice now that wasn't there 2 years ago, and I think that trend will continue, and the content will continue to improve.
In terms of the way that you are attracting customers, what specifically is drawing customers to 2 Degrees?
Well, we've got a very loyal base that's out there, both in the prepaid and in the postpaid, and obviously we'd like them to avail of the new broadband service as soon as possible. There's obviously an incentive in there, but we just believe it's easier to deal with one telco. You get one bill coming in on a monthly basis. You know where you are. You've got one customer care you can call, and just one person to deal with. And I think that will be the attraction.
Obviously, we got your numbers recently, which shows that the net loss is narrowing. How much longer do you think it's going to be until 2 Degrees is in a fully profitable situation?
I guess our modus operandi is never to really give forward-looking statements, Andrew. So I'm afraid I can't answer that one in the moment. But I think it's evidenced by the fact that the shareholders gave us the support to actually purchase Snap, that they believe in the business case. And they're quite comfortable with where the business plan is and how we're operating to that plan at this point in time.
Obviously, there's been consolidation in the marketplace. The M2 announcement mopping up Whoosh, of course, Vodafone buying World Exchange. How much do you believe that eventually this is going to come down to almost a 3-way split between the 3 major operators?
I think we're sitting at 4-way at the moment. I don't see anything that's going to change that in the near future. I think that's a healthy place to be with four operators there, all providing competitive services.
And that will still provide a profitable option for you down the track?
Yeah, we believe that, we wouldn't be selling it if we couldn't make a margin on it. We're making reasonable margins. We're more intent on providing a value offering to the customer base in New Zealand, and we really believe we can make inroads on this.
Well, now that you've got an offering that effectively matches what is available in the marketplace at the moment, what else do you believe is going to be potential areas that you could further enhance your offering in the future?
Well, this is very much a consumer-based play. In the relatively near future, we'll come out with something that's targeted to SMEs. And then you shouldn't lose sight of the fact that, 50% of Snap's business was in the enterprise space. They serve large, mission-critical, multi-location customers such as Canterbury District Health Board, various regional councils and city councils. So I think there's a huge opportunity to grow both in the SME market and also in the enterprise. How
far away do you think that offering is going to be?
Well, the enterprise offerings out there right now. There's a huge pipeline in the Snap portfolio, and it's been added to now because we can go in there and do a joint offer to the enterprise space. SME, I think you'll see that coming out in the next couple of months.
And just give us a sense of finally how competitive this market is. How much are you having to really, cut your margin as tightly as possible to secure and retain every customer?
We're comfortable with the margins at the moment. I think the difference between us and some of the other players is our cost base. We've got no legacy issues there that we need to take care of. So, I run a fairly tight ship here, and every single headcount gets authorised by me. And maintaining that cost base will allow us the flexibility to remain competitive in the market.
Thanks for joining us, Stuart Sheriff, Chief Executive, 2 Degrees, here on NBR Radio.
You're listening to NBR Radio. Upgrade to My NBR Radio with a smartphone-only subscription to NBR Online today for free and receive unlimited access to NBR Online on your smartphone until August 31st. Visit www.nbr.co.nz/free.
Let's talk regulations. A wide-ranging set of reforms is to be implemented to shake up the way New Zealand government agencies develop, write and implement regulations. Speaking at a breakfast meeting in Wellington, Economic Development Minister Stephen Joyce, who also holds the regulatory reform portfolio, said the government had decided to adopt in whole or in part all 44 recommendations of last year's report on the regulatory environment by the Productivity Commission. The report said New Zealand's large stock of regulation was failing to keep up with changing circumstances. Mr Joyce said the reforms would see greater use of exposure drafts of new laws, stronger expectations and reviews of Crown regulators, and more transparent cost recovery practices. Mr Joyce said in seeking a more productive and collaborative approach between regulators and their stakeholders, the government would use more open book exercises and more exposure drafts to, in effect, crowdsource improvements to regulations. So-called open book exercises would allow fee payers more input into agency cost structures. Exposure drafts are already commonly used before changes to tax law. More systematic monitoring of existing regulations will be required by government departments with stronger expectations and performance reviews than in the past. There would be investment in improving the capability of regulators across government agencies. Mr Joyce said the changes are designed to create a positive culture change among regulators whose attitudes are as important as the laws themselves. Regulation is not the highest profile topic in government, but it affects all New Zealanders and causes a lot of angst when it's not done well. Let's talk oysters and champagne. Musician turned restaurateur Tim Arnold is about to launch a high-end champagne and oyster bar in Auckland CBD. The bar is due to open next month on the ground floor of the heritage Kauri Timber Building. NBR Radio understands Rockefeller Champagne and Oyster Bar is owned by Mr Arnold, a former Pluto band member who is unavailable for comment. The Fanshawe Street Building's developer, Greer Stevens, is keeping details closely under wraps, but revealed the bar is scheduled to open on August 10. The interior is still receiving its final touches, but already sports 50 lamps hanging from the high ceilings over an open kitchen and bar. A wide staircase leads from Fanshawe Street into the timber-floored establishment, with mirrors running the length of one white brick wall and elegant chandeliers, though with two reminiscent of disco balls dotted around. The area is close to the head offices of some of the largest companies in New Zealand, such as Vodafone, Air New Zealand and ASB, with Fonterra also building a new head office nearby. Approached for comment, Mr Stevens declined to elaborate on the plans for the bar. Along with the Kauri Timber Building, the development portfolio of Mr Stevens' company Urban Collective features restored apartment and office blocks around the city and its fringes. It's also currently working on a quartet of exclusive chalets in Queenstown and two designer apartment buildings in Grey Lynn. The iconic four-storey Kauri Timber Building was originally established in 1883 and renovated in 2013 to comply with earthquake and building codes. It was sold to Triumph Property Investments in May 2012 by Eric Watson and Mark Hodgson's O'Mara Property Group. The sole director of Triumph Property Investments at the time of the building's acquisition was Mark Lindale, but the company was wholly owned by Triumph nominees, which included Brian Fitzgerald on the directors list. Mr Lindale and Mr Fitzgerald were both involved with failed lending company Strategic Finance, which collapsed into liquidation in 2010, owing investors $416 million. Triumph Property Investments' name was changed in June 2012 to Kauri Timber Building Limited, and Mr Fitzgerald was appointed as a director in September last year.
Tuesday the 28th of May, NBR Radio, I'm Andrew Patterson. Well, Epsom MP David Seymour is seething at Auckland Council's decision to include the Auckland Energy Consumer Trust, the AECT, in its review of financing options. The ACT leader says the council needs to keep its hands off the AECT dividends, saying they belong to Auckland residents. And David Seymour joins us now. Well, firstly, obviously you are not impressed with this idea.
Oh, well, the Auckland Council have become like crack addicts with their predilection for other people's money, and I doubt that they are thinking sensibly or rationally. They're just thinking that they have a vastly over-expansive conception of their own role in life. They believe that they're not only there to provide essential services, but essentially recreate the city-state, investing in cinemas and film studios and all sorts of other activities that councils should not be involved in. So I doubt that they've really considered the ethics of how they're treating AECT trustees or beneficiaries. I suspect that they're purely focused on feeding the beast that has become Auckland Council.
Clearly, this would require a change of legislation to allow it to happen. What's the likelihood of that actually happening?
Oh, well, it's very, very bad politics. Usually governments tax a large number of people a little bit to give a small number of people a benefit in the hope that those small number of people will be motivated enough to change their vote. Funnily enough, this is the opposite scenario, where a relatively small number of Aucklanders who are still in the AECT zone and receive that check every year will notice if it's taken off them and may very well change their vote in response. However, the remaining Auckland ratepayers will get a relatively small subsidy that they will not notice, and they will be unlikely to change their vote in favour of whoever does this expropriation. So it's very bad politics to take a noticeable benefit off one group of people and give an unnoticeable benefit to another. So I don't suspect it will happen. I certainly will be opposed, and I would expect my colleagues in the National Party would also be opposed to this abrogation of property rights.
Have you been surprised at some of the individuals supporting this idea?
Oh, very surprised at Cameron Brewer. He's my co-favourite councillor on the Auckland Council, a very robust individual that can usually be relied upon to stand up for the rights of ratepayers and the principles of markets in general. But in this instance, I think he's very ill-advised.
I see even former National Energy Minister Max Bradford, who was the architect of the AECT Trust, labelled the proposal as crazy.
Well, I haven't seen those comments, but I'm not surprised. I mean, it's something that even kids in the playground understand very well. This is mine, and it's wrong to forcefully take it just because you can. And so I'd be very surprised if we were to have a lot of support for this move. Certainly there'd be very strong opposition, I suspect, from within the Epsom electorate.
Interesting enough that the trust itself isn't due to be wound up for about another 60 years, so it is a little premature to think you can get your hands on it 60 years before it's due to be wound up. Yeah,
and people are living longer and longer. Maybe just a bit more patience is required.
How valuable do you think the $300 that people receive in dividends, how significant is that to them, do you believe?
Well, of course, it's going to vary. Many people in my Epsom electorate probably do not notice $300 a year too acutely, but there will be other people, particularly pensioners who have fixed incomes, who do look forward to it and do rely on it. And I think that our main sympathies should be with them.
Thanks for joining us, Epsom MP David Seymour on NBR Radio.
NBR Radio with Bailey's, New Zealand's leading commercial real estate company.
Tuesday the 28th of July, this is NBR Radio, I'm Andrew Patterson, and with me Rob Hosking previewing the Reserve Bank Governor's speech tomorrow. Rob, kind of a tricky balancing act for the Governor here. On the one hand, he doesn't want to be seen to be talking the economy down too much because there's been plenty of that over the last few weeks, but then also he doesn't want to be seen to be being perhaps too optimistic either.
No, that's right. Look, this looks like it could be quite a significant speech. It's coming just over halfway between two sets of economic forecasts from the Reserve Bank, and a lot has changed since the last set. Things haven't panned out quite as expected, and the dairy price has been the big one there. That was expected to bottom out a wee bit, and of course it hasn't. It's kept falling. The other thing is that we've had offshore turmoil in Greece and in China. And that's affected sort of the global mood, I guess. And the New Zealand dollar has fallen a lot more than what the Reserve Bank expected. It's currently running about 6% on a trade-weighted index basis below what it was expected to average for the entire quarter. So, things have come down a wee bit. Now, really what he wants to do is to, I suppose... I'm just going to come in on that sentence.
Yeah,
again,
that's
sorry.
right. Sure. 3, 2, 1.
Really what I think he's going to do is what he should do is come in and just provide a sort of steadying message here. On the one hand, yes, things aren't looking quite as rosy as they were back in early June when they were forecasting 3% GDP average over the next 3 years. It's probably, I suspect, and this is a very, very rough sort of back of an envelope sort of thing, I suspect we're probably going to come in around 2% average. That is still growth. It's still not bad growth if you look at what's happening elsewhere. It's just not quite what was anticipated. What he's not going to want to do is bulk things down, and there's been a heck of a lot of that in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I think people have overreacted quite badly to the dairy price fall. If you look at other parts of our economy, they're actually doing quite well. The latest services sector data, and services is still the biggest part of our economy by far, was actually remarkably expansionist, and quite a bit of that is tourism and manufacturing, which hasn't always had such a good run, is actually now in its 33rd month. So basically, nearly 3 years of expansion. And manufacturing is bigger than dairy, which sometimes people forget. So look, really, I don't think there's any need to go overkill here. I think one of the more influential things was there was a Television New Zealand Colin Brunton poll about 2 weeks ago, which showed that pessimists were outnumbering optimists to quite an extent, and it was the first time that balance had been quite that bad since April 2011, and so that was very much badged as a worst. People are the most pessimistic for years. But then you go back and you have a look at what actually happened there in April 2011, which is when it was. And yes, it was. The outlook, or a lot of people were quite pessimistic. They were wrong. In the next 12 months, the New Zealand economy grew at the fastest rate it had done since the global financial crisis. So there's been a real, and that poll the other night on the leading news channel and everything, and it really got over pushed as being, oh my God, things are bad. And it's bunkum, frankly.
It's the old issue of the wisdom of crowds, Rob.
Yeah, and the folly of crowds.
Yep.
And look, if this flows through into, if that pessimism flows through into lower investment, lower hiring, then yes, we will nudge ourselves into a weaker economic performance than we might otherwise do. And look, I've got absolutely no doubt that some sectors are going to have a very tough year. In fact, I think they're going to have people in the dairy, some people in the dairy sector, and some people exposed to the dairy sector are going to have a very tough couple of years. But I think the overall economy is not headed for a recession or anything like it. And I suspect, or I hope, that's going to be the message from Wheeler tomorrow.
So his message is likely to be, yes, dairy prices have fallen, but then so has the dollar.
I think things have, but some of those. You're right around the dollar. The dollar has come down. Look, the dollar is nearly 25 against the US dollar. It's nearly 25% lower than it was about 14 months ago. That's quite an adjustment. And what has been significant about that adjustment is that it hasn't flowed through into inflation at all. We have negative inflation if you take off in the last year, if you take off the cost of or the effect of the extra tax on cigarettes. So, and that's not really inflation at all. That's just the government hauling a bit more out of smokers. So look, the real price inflation is negative, and despite a 25% fall in the exchange rate against the US cross rate, there's a number of different players here, and that low inflation is feeding into lower costs for businesses. So long as the phrase I've used several times, and I'm sort of sticking to, is we're having to drop a gear here, but we're still going forward.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. Rob Hosking, previewing the Reserve Bank Governor's speech. Graham Wheeler speaking tomorrow. Be plenty of interest in it, and we'll be covering it, of course, here on NBR Radio.
NBR Radio. Free to air online with business news you can use.
Let's talk the economy and the Reserve Bank. Reserve Bank Governor Graham Wheeler is to give what is being billed as a significant speech on the state of the economy tomorrow morning. The Governor cut the OCR a further 25 basis points last week, taking it to 3%, and signalled further cuts are likely. The statement, though, was not as downbeat as perhaps some of the financial markets were expecting. The New Zealand dollar rebounded after the review. There had been some overexcited talk of a 50 basis point rate cut, and when that did not happen, the overnight index swaps found themselves having to rewind from their previous positions. Overexcitement, or rather over-pessimism, may well be what Mr Wheeler intends to douse in tomorrow's speech. There has been a wave of negative chatter in recent weeks, again mostly following the continued dairy price fall, but also due to offshore excitements over Greece and over the fall in the Chinese stock market. Domestically, there has also been a wave of negativity from opposition politicians playing up the bad news around the dairy price, and also a Colmar-Brunton survey that showed a clear pessimistic tilt. That poll, though, was more than a little overhyped, although it was breathlessly reported as being the most pessimistic for years. The last time it dipped this low was in April 2011. It's a matter of record. The New Zealand economy grew 2.6% in the next 12 months, the best 12 months of growth since the global financial crisis. So that poll might not be the best indicator for the economy. For more on this Rob Hosking story, nbr.co.nz. Let's talk the tally. New Zealand On Air has announced $20.3 million will be invested in local drama and dramatised documentary in its first funding round. The money will be distributed to 4 shows: Dirty Laundry, West Side 2, Bombshell, The Sinking of the Rainbow Warrior and Gene. New Zealand On Air Chief Executive Jane Wrightson took the opportunity to address speculation the organisation will contribute funding to TV3's new soap, which is expected to screen at 5:30pm on TV3, filling the void left by Home and Away 2 years ago. She said, "We acknowledge recent discussion about a new soap. We have not yet received a funding application for this. It may come to us for assessment in the coming months, along with other projects in development and potential returning series." Bombshell and Gene are being supported by New Zealand On Air's Platinum Fund. So, Dirty Laundry, $6.7 million, 13 60-minute episodes, Filthy Productions for TV1. Dirty Laundry centres on a middle-class family whose mother's jailed for money laundering. Will they keep her business interests going to sustain their lifestyle? It's written and produced by some of our most experienced drama creators, Rachel Lang, Gavin Strawn and Stephen Zanofsky. West Side 2, $7.6 million, 10 60-minute episodes, South Pacific Pictures for TV3. The second season of West Side, which was, of course, the prequel to Outrageous Fortune, will treat audiences to 10 more episodes of Ted and Rita West's world. Bombshell, The Sinking of the Rainbow Warrior, $2.9 million for 2 hours of screen time, New Zealand for TV1. Bombshell tells the story of a nation-defining moment caused by a foreign government sanctioning a clumsy act of terrorism on our shores, written by John Bannis. Gene will receive $3.1 million, a 2-hour lippy picture production for TV1. Gene will take viewers into the world of New Zealand aviatrix pioneer Jean Batten. Gene will be written and produced by Paula Book and Donna Mullane, makers of Field Punishment No. 1 and Tangiwai, written by John Bannis. Let's talk advertising. NZX, the stock market operator, said advertising in its portfolio of agricultural publications dropped 17% in the first half, reflecting the slump in dairy prices and the impact of drought. The company's agricultural titles include New Zealand Farmers Weekly, the nation's biggest newspaper for farmers, Countrywide and New Zealand Dairy Exporter. Agricultural information accounted for about 16% of NZX's $16.4 million of revenue in the first quarter. The advertising page equivalence booked during that quarter was down 20.4% on a year earlier. The company said today declines in the dairy price and drought conditions early in the period have negatively impacted advertising spend in the agri sector, with total paid advertising page equivalents in NZX's agri publications down 17.4% on the prior comparable period. Weakness in dairy prices may have lifted demand for NZX-traded dairy derivatives. The company said today that lots traded soared 143% in the first half, including a record 18,255 lots in May. Whole milk powder slumped 13% in the latest GDT auction. NZX said total trades on the Clear Grain Exchange, its Australian grain trading business, fell about 24% in the first half, following a smaller harvest across the Tasman and more grain being sold in the fourth quarter of 2014. There was a small lift in tonnes traded in the latest 6-month period, it said. NZX shares last traded at 107 and have declined 17% in the past 12 months.
NBR Radio with Hotel de Brett, your home away from home, but with better service. NBR Radio.
Tuesday the 28th of July, this is NBR Radio, I'm Andrew Patterson. New Zealand's standing as an immigrant-friendly country is without peer in the Asia-Pacific region. In his Editor's Insight today, Neville Gibson says a new global ranking lists countries on the success of their integration policies. So Neville, what's the list all about?
Well, it's called the Migrant Integration Index, or known as MIPEX, and it's co-funded by the European Union, and it's really the developed world's guide to immigration policies. New Zealand's latest ranking is third, behind Sweden and Portugal, so that puts us number one in Asia Pacific, and it indicates this country's pretty high attraction to migrants, but also the success of our integration policies. While the details for New Zealand aren't yet available, it's also backed up by data from a 350-page report from the OECD itself, and this compares immigration immigration in the EU and other OECD nations, and these, of course, are where the millions of migrants are going. A little bit different from how it used to be in past centuries, where the migrants left Europe and went to places around the world and settled, just as New Zealand was. It's also relevant to note that among the migrants, there's about 115 million migrants in the total region altogether, or people who weren't born in these particular countries. But in New Zealand, the number of foreigners plus their native-born children born here to both parents is the 45% of the population, and that's the fourth highest in the world after Israel, Luxembourg and Australia.
Gosh, that's interesting, isn't it? It just really does show what a country of migrants we have become. So what does this OECD report actually cover?
Well, for the first time, it puts together a whole lot of international comparisons. As I say, it's 350 pages, it's full of tables and so on, and it really compares how each country handles immigration and how their children fare, the first generation, in the labour market, jobs, education, their income, housing, health, civic engagement and social cohesion. And in most cases, they point out the difficulties of absorbing millions of people from the third world into country and wanting to improve themselves, of course, into countries of what we might call the first world or the Western world. And as I say, this is also a little bit different from the old settler countries like New Zealand, Australia, where Europeans arrived, and also in the Americas, seeing native populations there that weren't quite up to speed as they would see it, and basically swamped those countries. So today's migrants are in a totally different category altogether.
So what does the report suggest, or what is that? Let me try that again. 3, 2, 1. So what does the report say about how well these migrants actually integrate?
Well, it's fraught with a lot of difficulties, and the OECD language is full of jargon, and it essentially says, if you can translate it, that the better educated and more proficient you are in the host country's language, the better you do. And it means the opposite. So the poorer and less educated you are, the harder it is to get over all those hurdles before you get a degree of integration. And that can take some time, sometimes more than one generation. It also means for the host countries, they've got to work out how they're going to spread these people around the country, or do they allow them to all coalesce into ghettos. Now, Australia, Canada and New Zealand are among the countries known as settler countries, and of course we're quite know about immigration, have done it for a century or more, and it also congratulates these countries on the way they're handling it. Of course, it's a lot easier for us to control the level of migrants and how they get here. And it shows up some huge comparisons, like the countries that are most attractive to migrants within Europe, like the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, these sort of places, are also the ones that face the most difficult problems of giving the migrants employment and so on, not just the language, but also the fact that I think it's probably they just lack that settler mentality, whereas we are the opposite. We want them to come here, and we've got the way to integrate them properly.
So should we be doing more about perhaps refugee migrants?
Well, refugees are a different category altogether than those who are migrating legally or illegally to advance themselves. And the report hints that we shouldn't overwhelm our system because it's already working. And while we've got quite what some people consider to be a pretty low quota, the fact is that these people are harder to integrate, and therefore we don't want to break a working machine. And the reason that there's no backlash against immigration in New Zealand, as there is right across the European Union, is because we have the ability to select the migrants. basically give them points for integration and all that sort of thing. So basically the kind of people we select, the ones who want to come here and integrate more easily. So I think that is a very successful policy. When it comes to refugees, you have to tread much more carefully.
So just finally, should immigration controls be relaxed?
Well, we're used to immigration policy being tinkered with over a long period of time, and of course it's only in the past couple of years that we've actually seen a big inflow, and that's largely driven, I must say, by New Zealanders wanting to immigrate back to their home country rather than us taking in any more numbers. And we have a department that works quite hard to sift those people out. We also, when looking at what Immigration Minister announced the other day, he announced a new global impact visa, which would try to attract high impact entrepreneurs and investors and people from Silicon Valley. Now, these sort of schemes have been tried in the past for investors and others, and they don't really quite work out, so I'm not quite sure what goes wrong there. I suspect we have to change our business environment a bit more than we're used to attract these kind of things. Mainly, we now have middle income to lower income migrants wanting to come here, and we seem to be absorbing them pretty well, as we're doing with Filipino workers in the South Island. Our hospitality industry basically runs on imported labour, and it's also going to be easier for some of these people now to get permanent visas if they rather than the one-year renewals. So as long as they stay in the South Island or in the regions, and everyone in those regions and in Wellington who want IT workers have all approved and think this new policy is a good one.
Interesting report. Thanks for the insight, Editor Neville Gibson with us on NBR Radio.
NBR. With a National Business Review smartphone subscription, you can read or listen to the latest from NBR online. And for a limited time, it's free. Join NBR's Intelligent Business Network today and get free smartphone access to NBR online until August 31st. NBR doesn't do sport, weather or horoscopes, just timely, relevant, useful and insightful business news. So for business news you can use for free, visit nbr.co.nz/free.
I'm Grant Walker with Last Call. Here's what's trending on NBR Online. David Seymour tells the Auckland Council hands off Auckland Energy Consumer Trust dividends. Chinese shares continue to plunge in early trading. Maori businesses are more optimistic than the others. A whole lot of countdown outlets are up for grabs. And what telly shows have just been funded? To find out more on our stories, log on to nbr.co.nz or stay tuned. Those stories coming up next on NBR Radio. To Waiheke Island, Auckland's multi-millionaire Spencer family has won the right to appeal a decision relating to the mapping of outstanding landscapes on its Waiheke Island estate. In April, Justice Pamela Andrews dismissed an appeal by Man o' War Station, owned by the $650 million Spencer family, against a decision of the Environment Court. The family disputes how much of its 1,821-hectare Waiheke estate, as well as parts of nearby Ponui Island, should be classified as outstanding natural landscapes by Auckland Council. Such a designation under the Resource Management Act could restrict farming activities on the land, 64 hectares of which is already planted in grapevines, they say. Federated Farmers supports Man o' War Station's position, while Auckland Council and the Environment Defence Society oppose it. The application for leave to appeal was heard at the start of July, with the July 3 judgment made public this week. In it, Justice Andrews says the appeal is allowed because the case involved sufficiently important public and private interests. Man o' War Station's lawyer, Matthew Casey QC, argued there are 5 questions of law seriously arguable in an appeal, the interests in which it extends beyond the Spencer family's own circumstances. He says the judgment in this case has implications across Auckland, particularly for large areas of land mapped as outstanding natural landscapes in the proposed unitary plan. But it will also help other regions and districts decide what areas to map and how to deal with resource consent applications in such areas. Auckland Council's lawyer, Brent O'Callaghan, said although the proposed appeal raised questions of law, there was no utility to an appeal, and 3 of the points were not capable of bona fide serious argument. He said there would be no material difference in the outcome of any cases, irrespective of whether the Court of Appeal decided to allow the appeal or not. Justice Andrews' judgment says the appeal is capable of serious argument and gave leave to appeal on each of the 5 questions. He said, I also accept that the case involves public and private interests sufficient in the importance to outweigh the cost of permitting another appeal. The Environmental Defence Society had welcomed Justice Andrews' first judgment in April, saying the decision reinforced the need to identify and protect outstanding parts of the country, of which only a small proportion of the coast qualifies. It says councils must do that. That status does not mean that such areas can't be used, but that activities that will detract from those values should be located elsewhere. The Spencer family has long fought the council over consents on its Waiheke Island estate. Last year, it won the right to build a house on the island's pristine and remote Cactus Bay, once a favourite picnic spot for Waiheke residents, before John Spencer cut public access to the beach. Now, if you want to read the full judgment, nbr.co.nz. In market news, Somerset Group, the country's third biggest listed retirement village operator, has bought a 2.3 hectare site in Auckland's Parnell, which it plans to develop as a premium site. The company bought the land from state-owned rail operator KiwiRail for an undisclosed sum and will use the site as one of two premier villages servicing Auckland's eastern suburbs. Wellington-based Somerset has made 3 northern property purchases in the last fortnight, acquiring land next to its Warkworth village north of Auckland and taking a 127-year lease in the upmarket Auckland suburb of St John's. Chief Executive Julian Cook said these high-quality sites are great additions to Somerset's existing group of villages. We are a firmly nationwide retirement village operator, but Auckland is a big part of our focus, and we're seeing growing interest in all of our Auckland villages. New Zealand retirement village operators are acquiring land and preparing for a record building spree in anticipation of increased demand as people born in New Zealand's post-war era reach the target age for operators. Somerset said there are 9,000 people over the age of 75 near the Parnell location, which is set to rise to 17,000 by 2013. The company shares last traded at $4.12 and have gained 49% this year. Let's talk cyberbullying. NetSafe Chief Executive Martin Cocker says there will need to be significant upscaling required if NetSafe is chosen as the government's approved agency for resolving cyberbullying complaints under the new Harmful Communications Bill. A call for expressions of interest to become the selected agency was sent out from Justice Minister Amy Adams' office this week, attracting the Internet watchdog's interest. The agency will mediate offending parties and victims, as well as having direct contact with teams behind sites like Facebook and Twitter, which often leave complaints from members of the public falling on deaf ears. Mr Cocker says NetSafe, which identifies as New Zealand's only active cyber safety organisation, will apply for the role after recommendations from the Law Commission, but with a small team, new resources will be needed. He says we won't be able to do it at our current size. This is a new service, which means someone's going to have to add some capability somewhere. Mr Cocker says the non-profit organisation has played a significant role in the introduction of the new law and believes it will be able to act as an unbiased mediator if selected. Mr Cocker says the Act clearly identifies an objective to address seriously harmful content. There will be a series of thresholds applied to the approved agency, but maintaining independence is part of the system. A spokesperson from Ms Adams' office said applications would guide the next steps in the selection process. The agency's appointment would set a new benchmark for curbing online harassment and intimidation that causes serious emotional distress. It's unclear whether having the Law Commission's backing will boost NetSafe's chances of being selected. Mr Cocker says we've got to go through the application process like everyone else, and we'll see what comes out the other end.
NBR. Need to hire? Try our online recruitment platform, www.nbrtalent.co.nz.
NBR Radio on Tuesday the 28th of July. I'm Andrew Patterson and this is Property Talk. With me Chris Hutching and Sally Lindsay. Sally, to you first, the leaky buildings floodgate opening. It's been open for some time. What's the latest development?
Yeah, but it's opened even further now.
Right.
Because the Court of Appeal has upheld a High Court decision saying that the 10-year limitation on claiming is especially against cladding manufacturers, actually doesn't exist. And anyone can claim against any cladding manufacturer. Doesn't matter when their building was built, when it started leaking, it's open to claims. So Adina Thorne, who's taking the good cladding class action, which is about $100 million plus, says this has opened the floodgates and she expects a lot more people to join her action, because cladding manufacturers are definitely different to builders who are the ones that have been in the gun so far. And all this came about as a result of Carter Holt Harvey suing the Ministry of Education suing Carter Holt Harvey over leaky schools. There's about 5,000 schools around the country leaking, and so it's taken a case on behalf of boards of trustees. But Carter Holt Harvey's being has been trying to get the case thrown out of court and went to the Court of Appeal to argue that all counts should be thrown out, but the Court of Appeal says no. There's 4 counts that are arguable and the case will go ahead. So, and it also reaffirmed the position about the 10-year stopgap legislation. So apart from that, there is also another case going on in the High Court, which is actually over structural defects of a building. And depending on how that case goes, that could also open the floodgates even further.
Gosh, so this is actually significant for people who are caught up in the whole issue.
Very significant, because a lot of people have had nowhere to turn because they've fallen outside the council and the government's statutory period. So, and then a lot of the people have had to pay out $300,000, $500,000 to $1 million to get their places repaired. It's left them in financial straits. So this is one way that they can try and recover the money. Whether, of course, the class action is successful is another matter, because the cladding manufacturers will fight it up till the bitter end. But Adina Thorne's saying that it is the cladding that is defective, and it isn't the builders who've been putting it on. Some of them might have been a bit lazy, but in fact the actual products are defective to start with, so no matter what you did with them, they were always going to be leaky.
Indeed. All right, that's going to be a fascinating case to follow. Chris, to you, this Clancy collapse prompting a call for the company's office oversight.
Yeah, well, we have a case here, depressingly familiar one, where a guy by the name of John Clancy has gone missing, and there are a whole lot of investors out of pocket, and liquidators are involved, and that sort of thing. Now, the complaint about the way the company's office records have been used comes from the Society for Promotion of Community Standards, which I hadn't really heard too much of for years. I had the impression they sort of looked at moral issues. But
they've been around for a long time.
Yeah, well, we do all remember Pat Bartlett from way back,
sure.
if that's the connection. But anyway, they seem to be rather interested in these sorts of issues these days. And what Clancy's done is something that I've noticed over the years, whereby you go and look up a dodgy company chief executive or investor or shareholder director, and you find that the names and addresses and ownership get changed around when things start to go a little bit tricky, and these people, they'll put mates as directors, mates as shareholders, they'll get, say, an accountant or a lawyer to set up a nominee company, so that you really don't know who is behind the thing. And it's quite interesting. Sometimes you look at even a fairly straight development, and you go back to search up who it is, and you can't get there because you end up with a nominee company with an accountant or something like that. So the Society for the Community Standards is saying that this sort of thing's going on all the time, and I'm inclined to agree. And whether or not it's legal or strictly legal, I think the enforcement team at the company's office needs to give it a bit of a look.
All right, one to follow there as well too. Also, Chris, you've been following the story of the rural property downturn, and this court delay has put the Hurunui Dam back on the back burner.
Yeah, well, the reason that this is so interesting to me is that it's in the context of this thing called the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, which is something that is championed by the commissioners who replaced elected councillors. You might remember in 2010, the Environment Minister, Nick Smith, sacked our elected members here, and he installed these stooges, these commissioners, to take over and advance water projects, which are mainly irrigation projects, of course, although they dress it up a little bit with some other stuff about protecting water. And in this particular case, there's a dam, one of the main projects in Canterbury currently underway. It hasn't begun, it's still at the capital raising stage, it's still at the site inspection stage, that sort of thing, but it's been held up in the Environment Court. And of course, this water management strategy under the commissioners, they've been championing it for ages, saying that it's a great collaborative system, and it's all go, and we're sorting it all out. Well, it's not, is it? It's just the same as always, getting held up in courts and whatnot. I guess the wider background to this is the financial problems besetting the rural sector. I don't think that this company is ever going to get private enterprise funding, except perhaps from one of its major shareholders, Ngāi which of course is a big corporate. It's got about 30% of this company. But your local farmers, they're not going to be in a position to do these sorts of investments for years, and it's the same all around the country. So unless you're going to throw massive subsidies at them, which is quite likely, government subsidies and local council subsidies, that's the only way they're ever going to get off the ground.
All right. Sally, you've been looking at retail shopping, two big shopping centres, in fact, one set to open in Auckland for the equivalent of, 4 rugby fields?
That's right. DNZ are opening their big new mall later this year, and that's a $155 million mall at the Westgate Shopping Centre, and it'll have 100 retail tenancies, and it's got Countdown Supermarket as one of its anchor tenants, and it's expected to provide up to 700 jobs in the area. So everyone's excited about that, apart from the Auditor-General, who's actually carrying out an inquiry into the council's involvement actually in the $1 billion Westgate Town Centre. It started the inquiry earlier this year after complaints about the council's contract with people there and whether they have assessed the project properly, how they've been managing the risks and conflicts of interest. The Auditor-General's office said the inquiry is ongoing and there's no time frame for it to be finished. Meanwhile, in Rotorua, a $13 million entertainment zone is to be developed as part of a 27,000 Linmore Junction project. And this is being developed by Rotorua's Homes Group and includes one of the biggest all-weather entertainment centres in New Zealand. So that is going to be a big development for Rotorua. It'll have 260 car parks. It's going to be near the forest, the lakes and the eastern suburbs. And it's part of a massive, probably one of the biggest developments in Rotorua that there has been for years.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a significant development for Rotorua and obviously part of its tourism precinct as well too.
Yes, that's right. And so they're planning it to support the new developments rather than, pull down and redo things. So they're pulling down the existing buildings on the site and expect to start work in early next year.
And just finally, Chris, Charitable Pasture Renewal Trust to rebrand. I'm sure this is the trust itself being charitable rather than the pasture.
Yeah, well, this one caught my eye. It's a bit of a dag in a way. They're holding a rebranding cocktail function tomorrow in Wellington, one of the places down the Wellington waterfront there. And I looked at this and I thought, what? Pasture Renewal Charitable Trust? Well, it turns out that it's got about 14 sponsors, and these are all agribusiness companies, like the seed companies and expertise companies, fertilizer companies and whatnot, and which sort of made me think, I wonder if they're also the beneficiaries. But, of course, they couldn't be because, that wouldn't be charitable. So apparently the New Zealand public, the wide New Zealand public, are the beneficiaries, which I suppose kind of makes sense. It's drawing a rather long bow, it seems to me. I think there's sort of room there for other charitable trusts under that type of definition. It's kind of weird too because Charities Commission has been going through all this charitable.
That's right. I was going to mention that.
Assaults.
Yeah.
Anyway, they've had their legal guys on the case and their trustees, and they've obviously bent the arm or the ear of the Charities Commission, and they seem to have come through it okay. So there we go. Charitable trust that's into pasture renewal.
Yes, who would have thought? Perhaps confirming just how many possible ways it is to create a charity. Thank you both for joining us. Chris Hutching and Sally are with us here on NBR Radio.
NBR Radio. Free to air online. NBR, the meeting place of intelligent business.
In market news, A2 Milk Company Managing Director Jeff Babbage is sitting on a 730% capital gain after settling the outstanding amount due on 6 million partly paid shares he received 5 years ago. Mr Babbage received board approval on July 24 to pay up the remaining $594,000 owing on the partly paid shares that were issued at a price of 10 cents a share in August 2010 as part of his long-term incentive package. At A2's current trading, those shares are worth $4.98 million. Babbage had until August 25 to pay the balance owing. A2 expects to report annual earnings in late August. The company has a blackout policy on restricted persons trading the company's shares from the end of the financial year until the day after it formally announces the result to the market, though waivers can be granted. At the time Mr Babbage was issued with the partly paid shares, the then NZAX-listed stock was trading at 8.6 cents apiece, meaning shareholders who've been with the company over the same period have seen an 865% capital gain, outpacing the 53% increase in the S&P NZX All Index. In 2013, Mr Babbage took advantage of the jump in A2's share price, selling 4 million shares at 70.5 cents apiece. Those shares were part of his 2010 long-term incentive scheme priced at 10 cents each. On July 20, A2 provided a trading update, saying it had turned down a potential takeover bid by cornerstone shareholder Freedom Foods Group and US food and beverage firm Dean Foods, which some Australian media reported could be as much as $2 a share. The milk marketer said the offer wasn't compelling enough for the board to recommend, although it was open to the consortium trying again, and said other potential suitors had emerged. The A2 boss has another 5 million partly paid shares priced at 64 cents each. The 11 million shares held on trust by GCAA Investments Proprietary give Mr Babbage about 1.7% of the company. To finance and the Auckland Council, Epsom MP David Seymour is seething at Auckland Council's decision to include Auckland Energy Consumer Trust, or AECT, in its review of financing options. The ACT leader says the council needs to keep its hands off AECT dividends. Mr Seymour says, don't councillors understand property rights? AECT shares are not the property of Auckland Council. They belong to Auckland residents. If the council wants to get its hands on the shares, he says it's a telling sign of just how far it has overreached in attempting to govern Auckland. Created 20 years ago to take over the assets of the Auckland Electric Power Board as part of the then national government's electricity sector reforms, the AECT's 75.4% stake in regional electricity lines company Vector is conservatively valued at $2.1 billion. The stake is held for the benefit of Vector customers in Auckland, Manukau and northern parts of Papakura, who receive a dividend cheque of about $300 every September. The trust is due to be wound up in 2073, at which point the capital beneficiary will be Auckland Council or whatever local authority is in existence then. Auckland Councillor Christine Fletcher first floated the idea of trying to unwind AECT's legislation last year so ownership could be taken over by the council. The council could then borrow against the asset and service borrowings with the asset's annual revenue stream of $100 million. Support for the move has come from Auckland's business community. Employers and Manufacturers Association Chief Executive Kim Campbell said at the end of last year it was irresponsible to ignore the city's funding requirements. He said one of our largest assets is the $2.1 billion worth of shares held in trust for Auckland by the AECT. He said attention needs to be focused on the parlous state of the city's development. Planning for growth is being stymied on all fronts. Mr Campbell said that as the government was not interested in allowing regional fuel taxes or motorway tolling for extra funding, and nobody wants higher rates, the council's options are limited. He says the city owns many assets. Asset sales could delay the need for tolls and other cost increases. The recycling of city assets to fund infrastructure is very common internationally, and we're arguably behind the world in this. The architect of AECT, former National Energy Minister Max Bradford, labelled as crazy the proposal to wind up the trust. He said it'll be a great leap back to the 1960s and 70s when local power companies were owned by local bodies or were effectively run for the benefit of local bodies. They just became a cash cow for local bodies. They weren't there to give the best deal to customers. He said if ratepayers and the local councils simply grabbed those assets, then they would effectively be, for all intents and purposes, expropriating assets that don't belong to them. Councillor Cameron Brewer came back to the theme at last week's Finance and Performance Committee meeting, arguing AECT had to be included in the review of financing options. He said we owe it to ratepayers to explore the trust, its deed, legislation and the value or potential of its assets, instead of stinging them every year while council debt continues to skyrocket. Chief Financial Officer Sue Tyndall told councillors absolutely everything is on the table. Mr Seymour says families rely on the dividend to cover vital expenses and in some cases feed their children with it. He says Mr Brewer claims Aucklanders won't mind surrendering their dividends in exchange for rate cuts, but the council's spending record doesn't provide much hope for this. Local government in Auckland is out of control, spending on ambassadorial junkets, unelected advisory panels and bloated transport schemes. Mr Seymour says seizing AECT shares will give the council another excuse to boost its spending, leaving ratepayers and residents out of pocket.
Tuesday the 28th of July, this is NBR Radio, I'm Andrew Patterson. Further falls on the Chinese share markets, particularly the Shanghai Composite, experiencing its worst one-day fall since 2007. Following developments, our NBR editor, Neville Gibson. Neville, the problem is that there's a lot unknown behind the scenes here. We don't really necessarily know what's going on, do we?
That's right. In the first hour of trading, the three indices that people are watching, the Shanghai Composite, that's down 3.8%. The Shenzhen market's down 5.2%. In the new market for the new listings, Chi-Next, it's down 6%. So it looks like it's going to be another pretty rough day compared with the 8.5 it lost on Monday. But the main reason is that no one really knows what's going on. Investors don't know if the government is still purchasing the shares through what is called the China Securities Financial Corporation. It's buying up shares, or whether it's actually the government is gradually pulling back from the market and just seeing where the market's going to end up. One of the main shares, PetroChina, that went down 9.6%, and that's usually been one that's had a lot of support, and that didn't appear to have any at all yesterday.
Clearly this is going to be scaring retail investors. We know lots of amateur investors actually have got life savings on the line here. They'll be wanting presumably to get out and not be part of this extreme volatility that we're seeing in the market.
That's right. There's an element of panic here because you've got to remember that since the government moved in to put various measures in place like restricting the number of shares, a share has to stop trading if it falls more than or rises more than or falls more than 10%. But there's been a bit of a government buying, has actually put 16% on since July 8. Suddenly that sort of disappears. You've now got the securities regulator saying that, denying that the government has in fact started pulling out of the market, although there seems to be no evidence that this is actually happening.
I was watching a little piece on CNN the other night. They were talking to a bunch of people playing around a card table, and about half of them had lost substantially on the market and had got out altogether. This is the risk, isn't it, that people get a bad experience and then they never want to go back in again?
That's right. We've still got quite a bit of trading going on. There was a stop on a whole lot of the shares, but in yesterday's rout there was nearly 1,000 shares were traded, so there is a bit of activity going on. It's not like they've frozen the market, and my feeling is that maybe they're just letting the air out of the bubble a little bit more. Sure, there'll be a lot of losses there among investors, but you've got to remember that this is a market pretty much confined to well-off Chinese. Might be talking 80 or 90 million individual investors, but they're only a small part of the Chinese wealth overall. And I'm not saying they can afford to lose their life savings, but they've been pulling out of property and into shares. It's become the hot thing, and it's quite a common phenomenon, of course, throughout history of these new markets that take off like rockets and have a high degree of volatility, especially when there's a lot of new investors there.
If we were to take a worst-case scenario and see a really dramatic fall in the coming weeks or months, what sort of a flow-on effect do you think that would have on markets globally? Well,
the problem is that globally no one trusts what's going on in the market. I mean, we saw that the last time when it fell 30% in a week. Then suddenly it stabilises, the government comes in and starts buying through this finance fund, and you've got that big rise in the shares since July 8 of 16%. So who knows whether that exercise is going to be repeated or the whole of the dam has broken completely and they just let to see where it will fall.
And of course in the US they have what's known as the plunge protection team, don't they? And one assumes that China has an equivalent. They've been probably quite busy in the last few weeks.
Yes, well, it's certainly one to watch. And as I say, we've got figures only for the first hour of trading, and we've got another 3 or 4 hours of watching to do, so they'll be pretty interesting for the rest of the day.
Appreciate you joining us. Neville Gibson on NBR Radio.
NBR. NBR Radio with Bailey's, New Zealand's leading commercial real estate company.
To Maori business, ANZ Bank's 2015 Maori Business Report says Maori businesses are more optimistic in recording stronger profit growth than non-Maori firms, as the focus of the sector shifts from righting historical grievances to looking to the future. The ANZ privately owned business barometer found 72% of Maori businesses surveyed were upbeat about the next 3 years, up from a reading of 70% last year and ahead of 51% for non-Maori business. Over the past 12 months, 54% of Maori businesses in the survey recorded an increase in profit. That compares to 46% for non-Maori firms. The report said businesses were starting to leverage their Maori heritage, with 51% of Maori business respondents seeing it as an advantage, whether it was a unique selling point or a culture focusing on long-term sustainability rather than short-term gains. The report said this year's barometer highlights the changing perspectives among respondents, from a focus on survival to a focus on future prosperity. It's a more forward-looking focus that reflects in part a wider shift in both Maori and non-Maori from an adversarial process of righting historical grievances to figuring out how we can all work together to realise the opportunities in front of us. Respondents also noted greater willingness in the wider community, including financial institutions and the corporate sector, as well as government, to engage with Maori businesses. A Te Puni Kokiri report estimates the Maori economy was worth $42.6 billion in 2013. About $23.4 billion of that was made up by Maori employers, while Maori trusts and corporations and other entities contributed $12.5 billion. Of the 3,500 businesses surveyed for the ANZ Barometer series, 336 respondents self-identified as Maori in business and represented organisations with a combined annual turnover of more than $1 billion. Of those Maori businesses, 42% were companies, partnerships and joint ventures with Maori shareholders, 29% were Maori in business, 20% were Maori trusts and corporations, and the remaining 9% were iwi or hapu entities. While Maori businesses were more optimistic in their outlook, 35% said a lack of skilled staff was having an impact on their business, compared to 25% of non-Maori respondents. Of the Maori business respondents, 40% said they were actively recruiting Maori staff, with 23% saying it was very hard to find Maori staff, while 22% said it was very easy. Maori are traditionally overrepresented in New Zealand's unemployment stats, with about 12.6% of the 309,800 Maori workforce unemployed as at March 31st, compared to the 5.6% jobless rate across all ethnicities nationwide. The ANZ report showed the main industries for the Maori respondents were agriculture, forestry and fishing at nearly a third, with the remainder evenly split between education and training, professional, scientific and technical services, construction, hospitality and tourism, arts and recreation services, administrative and support services, personal services, healthcare and media and technology. The report is a collaboration between ANZ, Pautama Trust, Te Tumu Paeroa, New Zealand Māori Tourism and the Federation of Māori Authorities. Health and safety. The government's health and safety reform bill has retained the most important principles that underpinned it and will over time help to shift how we think about health and safety in New Zealand, according to Julian Hughes, Z Energy's General Manager for Health and Safety, who had earlier expressed fears the reforms would be gutted. A former executive director of the Business Leaders Health and Safety Forum, created after the 2010 Pike River mine disaster, Mr Hughes was among senior executives who last month questioned the motives behind the delayed report back of the bill from Parliament's Industrial Relations Committee and showed New Zealand risks forgetting the poor health and safety record that prompted the most fundamental reforms to health and safety law in the country's history. Speaking to Business Desk today, Mr Hughes said while there had been some tinkering around the edges of the bill, his worst fears had not been realised, although it remained to be seen how the decision to create distinctions between the obligations of high and low-risk businesses would pan out in practice. Although the bill softened the requirement for companies with fewer than 20 employees to have a health and safety representative, Mr Hughes said the fundamental obligation on all employers to provide a safe, healthy workplace was unchanged. He said this is something there's been a bit of confusion on. He said if you're running a plumbing firm with 5 people, you're still a company officer as defined by the bill, which was reported back late last Friday. He said if you're a director, owner, business leader all in one go, that's not watered down at all. Our position is that as opposed to a lot of the reporting last week, this represents the most significant shift in health and safety legislation ever in New Zealand. The Labour Party withdrew its support for the bill last week, largely because of those changes, saying it effectively relieved employers of their obligations to the health and safety of about 330,000 workers employed in small businesses. Council of Trade Unions President Helen Kelly said Prime Minister John Key had broken a promise not to take one step backward from the recommendations of an independent health and safety task force, which recommended a new approach to health and safety management, modelled on the Australian system, which emphasises the involvement of employees in managing their working environment. Mr Hughes said, "The bit where I think the Select Committee has created a slight problem for themselves is the introduction of defining low and high-risk industries. How do you decide that?" While some industries were obviously high risk, such as mining, forestry or fishing, others were less obvious, he said, citing hairdressing as an industry where harsh chemicals, sharp instruments and posture injuries were all well documented. It remained to be seen whether farming would be defined as a high-risk industry. Opposition to the bill, as originally formulated, was strongest from farmers and small business owners. That prompted delay in the final version of the bill as the Cabinet and backbench MPs sought to reassure themselves the new regime would be both workable and not politically suicidal. In property news, 19 supermarket properties currently on the market gleaned $15.4 million in rental income last year for their UK owners. The supermarkets are owned by Antipodean Supermarkets, a subsidiary of London-based William Pears Group and its joint partner Johnny Berman, and incorporated in 2006. The supermarkets were acquired in 2007 from ASX-listed Charter Hall Retail Trust at about the same time. The 2014 accounts show $15.4 million in rent, $14 million in expenses, including $8.1 million in financing costs, providing a $2.1 million profit after tax. Non-current assets of plant and equipment were $168 million. Accumulated losses were $26.7 million, according to the accounts posted on the company's office website. The properties are located from Auckland to Invercargill and now have a passing income of nearly $18.9 million, according to marketing material. Individual property rent rolls range from approximately $430,000 to $1.7 million. Most of the premises have 20-year leases. The properties are being marketed for sale by an international private treaty sale process by Colliers and JLL. The properties include 6 in Auckland, 5 in Wellington and 3 in Christchurch, with the balance in regional areas gleaning turnover of about $800 million. Countdown is New Zealand's largest private sector employer with 18,000 staff in 177 Countdown supermarkets. The largest of the 6 Auckland-based stores by income is Countdown Green Lane, located on the corner of Great South Road and Green Lane East Road.
Join NBR's Intelligent Business Network today. www.nbr.co.nz/subscribe. NBR.
In market news, Green Cross Health, formerly known as Pharmacy Brands, will return $20.3 million to shareholders through a special dividend after reviewing its capital structure. Green Cross said in a statement it'll pay 15 cents per share on August 21st to shareholders registered at the close of trading on August 7, after the board reviewed its capital and debt structure. The primary health and pharmacy retailer has largely driven expansion through equity funding and has settled on a new mix for debt and equity. Green Cross said the company continues its objective to invest and grow in its business units through both acquisition and organically. The new mix of equity and debt provides a platform to pursue this objective whilst enhancing returns to shareholders. The company made the announcement to the stock exchange while hosting its annual meeting in Auckland. Earlier this year, Green Cross reported a 4.1% decline in annual profit to $14.4 million, while lifting sales 25% to $322.4 million. The shares were unchanged at $2.14 and are up 0.9% this year, valuing the company at $289.6 million. It said Green Cross's dividend reinvestment plan won't operate in respect of the special dividend, but will for future payments. To the telecommunications market, 2 Degrees has launched its first 2 Degrees branded residential fixed-line broadband plans. The new service comes on the heels of the telco's $27 million purchase of Snap. Up until now, the deal has been pitched as a way for 2 Degrees to snare business customers. There are 2 home broadband plans, $69 a month with an 80 gig data cap, matching the cheapest DSL and fibre plans from market leader Spark, or $89 for unlimited downloads, again matching the cheapest deal from Spark and others. Those who have a mobile with 2 Degrees save $10 a month. 2 Degrees says that price covers whatever is the best internet connection available for your address, be it DSL, VDSL or UFB fibre. That's a leg up on most other ISPs who typically charge a premium for VDSL. Like Vodafone, 2 Degrees is dangling 6 months free access to Sky TV's $20 a month video streaming service Neon as bait to lure people to its unlimited plan. All customers can bundle their home phone with New Zealand and Australian landline calls from $15 a month, and fibre customers can supercharge a basic connection. The connection fee is $99, a modem costs $149 plus $10 delivery. The connection and modem fees are waived if you sign up for a 12-month plan. The early termination charge is $249. For more information on the ins and outs of this offer, nbr.co.nz. Let's talk hedging. KiwiSaver growth funds with unhedged exposure to Australian and international equities performed the best over the quarter after benefiting from the falling Kiwi dollar. The New Zealand dollar depreciated 8.1% against the US dollar, 12.1% against the euro, 13.4% against the pound and 9% against the Australian dollar due to falling dairy prices and the Reserve Bank loosening monetary policy amid a deteriorating economic environment. The depreciating New Zealand dollar was a key driver of performance for New Zealand investors during the quarter. Morningstar Manager Research Director Tim Murphy told NBR Radio it meant any asset sales offshore appreciated in value in New Zealand dollar terms as a result of that foreign currency exposure. So that's a great thing in the last quarter for Kiwi investors with Aussie, US and other dollar exposure in their underlying KiwiSaver funds. Currency movements are notoriously difficult to predict, especially over short periods, but fund managers must pay careful attention. KiwiSaver managers may still be able to take advantage of the depreciation, depending if there is a static or active hedging policy, according to Mr. Murphy. But he says if the Kiwi dollar begins to appreciate against other currencies again, there is a good chance of a reversal of these second quarter results. KiwiSaver assets on the Morningstar database were at $28.5 billion at the end of June, having grown from $19.9 billion at the same time last year and $15.2 billion the year before. In June 2008, the year after KiwiSaver began, assets were at $954.1 million. The industry remains highly concentrated, with the 6 largest KiwiSaver providers accounting for 86% of assets on Morningstar's database. The research shows Forsyth Barrs and Generate's aggressive and growth funds were the top performers among their peers in the June quarter due to their unhedged international equities exposure. Generate also performed best within the moderate category, while Kiwi Wealth was the top performer in the conservative category. Grosvenor KiwiSaver Socially Responsible Investment and Aon KiwiSaver Russell did best within the balanced category. Morningstar gave special mention to Aon KiwiSaver Russell for long-term performance after it topped all 5 multi-sector categories over 5 years. Foreign currency hedging is usually achieved through forward contracts, with most KiwiSaver providers managing international equities to a 50% benchmark hedge.
NBR Radio with Hotel de Brett. Open for breakfast, lunch and dinner and everything in between. NBR Radio.